In celebration of our history, we invite you, the family, to share in our African rituals. To honor our elders, will those African over 60 years of age please stand? To honor our children, those among us and those who have left us, will the youngest African child please stand or be held up? To honor African life, will those sisters who are carrying a child in their sacred womb please stand? Brothers and sisters of the Fresh World family, we thank you. I'm going to have two introductions of our guest speaker today. First, I'm going to call on Dr. Ben, and then I'm going to call on Dr. Clarke to make the introductions. Dr. Ben.
I will be rather brief because I'm going to defer to Dr. Clarke, my senior elder, to do the main introduction of the director, my director, Dr. Turner. But I am made to understand that since the trip to Egypt was overlooked, to remind you that on the 31st of July, the Cross-Wall Alliance and our Kabbalah Foundation will be leaving with our annual 15-day tour to the motherland, and particularly Egypt, returning on August the 14th, 1983. I must need say to you, you must get your application in. They are about to close out. And that's no joke. You must get it in as soon as you can if you intend to, at least the deposit. Dr. Turner, James Turner, is the Director of Africanist Studies and Research Center, which I found out and was there going in 13 years. I thought it was 10 or 11. But you work so hard up there that you don't remember time. It would have been my esteemed pleasure to do the introduction, but as I said, Professor Clarke preceded me there and is considered there in a very honored position. But I could not sit and not say a few words of my director. In 13 years at Cornell University Africanist Studies and Research Center, I have yet to be involved with a harsh word with my director. I say that because it is very rare that you can work with someone who is in charge, know that he's in charge, and at the same time have the humility to deal with you as a human being and with respect, rather than throwing around power. And I think I could say that, and to me, it is a great honor to pay to someone who is in authority and uses authority, but at the same time is human enough to treat you as a good human person. I am sorry that I have to leave early because I have to go to St. Francis College, a Roman Catholic college for young boys, to the awards banquet. These are young boys who are going to colleges, and they are receiving their awards, and they have asked me to come and speak to them free. And so I said I will come. So if you see me leaving, it is not because I want to get away from my boss, but because I think that we must help these younger brothers. Graduating from a Catholic college is bad enough. It's worse if they don't have somebody to cover the day when they're going to receive their honor. So I'm not going to say much more, but to let Dr. Turner know that I am sitting in his corner and know that we feel so proud about him, and I'm going to yield now to age. So,
thank you very much. I called when I was in Detroit in a conference on immigration and migration, lecturing on another phenomenon, the 14 years that the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies has been together. That is a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that stay together with some ethnic groups even a day before they declare that they don't belong to you and go on their way and sell their soul to somebody else. And I was explaining the political reasons we came together and the political reasons we stay together in spite of the difficulties. And I described the department and the coming together of the blacks and Puerto Ricans as a marriage of convenience, where both parties very often have to hold each other's hand to keep from hitting each other. Be that as it may, my main purpose here is to say a few words before Professor Turner speaks. Professor Turner has been one of those directors of programs that has had the highest respect for black scholars, especially black scholars having difficulty, financial and otherwise. He has found a place for a number of scholars in the interim of having difficulty at one institution before they go to another institution. He brought me to Cornell in the formative days of the Africana Center before some bigots burned the building down and they subsequently got another building. And I must say, the great joy of teaching creative approaches never came forth from me more sincerely than working under this young man. He never told me how to teach or even what to teach, but expected me to teach well. And I never disappointed him. And it came at a time I didn't need that long journey up to Ithaca and the cold weather in my bones, losing that teenage bounce, getting on and off airplanes. But there was something there I needed. I needed students with the wild excitement of learning and to enjoy the last spin-off from the civil rights movement, and to teach students who believed in themselves and believed they could do anything. I have met some of those students later, heads of programs all over this country. One's a head of a major law firm in Florida, and one's a surgeon out in the Midwest. A lot of them have made their way in the world thanks to the encouragement of Professor Turner. And I'm pleased that I was one of the people who supervised his PhD thesis before he became Dr. Turner. And I saw the worth in his work. I'm not here to make a speech instead of Dr. Turner, so very soon I'll introduce him before I forget that I'm not the speaker. He is, as we might say now, a child from the neighborhood. He's a Harlem boy. He has journeyed from this neighborhood, but always journeys back. He too went into Richard Moore's store and where the old master teachers that are selling books. And he too searched out his seniors in the intellectual world and found a place for them there at the Africana Center in Cornell. We must caution him about our expectations here. This is one of the most developed forums since the 30s, and the people who come here are very mature, and they expect a great deal of you, and they expect everybody that stands here to make a major speech from beginning to end. And they expect the message to come across pure and simple. And inasmuch as I have seen and heard James Turner on so many occasions speaking so very clearly to us about issues relevant to our survival, it is with pride that I welcome him here this evening, a friend, a colleague, and boy from the neighborhood, returned to Harlem to lecture to his people. James Turner.
It becomes very difficult for me each time to do what it is I consider to be very important for us all, and that is to be able to talk to each other very clearly, very plainly, very seriously. And that's not always easy. These are probably the most serious times that we have been in as a people for the last 45 years. And it is a period that has no vision at the end of it. There is no way that anybody that clearly understands where we're at right now can say somehow it's going to be better tomorrow. Or we shall overcome. It's just going to happen that way. But it is very important for us to understand why it is and what it means for us, particularly as a people. I want to say to you this afternoon that there is probably nothing more satisfying that I could think of than being here with you this afternoon. I'm deeply respectful and proud. I appreciate Brother John Henrik Clarke being here. We know that John Henrik Clarke has served his community and his people well, consistently for as long as I've been able to see, and probably before that. And yes, when it came time for someone to say whether or not I was able to be called doctor, whatever that should be, it was John Clarke that I said would be on that committee. Because I understand something very fundamental, that knowledge, that information, that the way you think is as much a part of what oppresses you than does all the poverty, all the police, the lack of jobs, all the jive-ass social workers, everybody, and all the joints that we go to. I learned that knowledge, white folks always say that knowledge is power, and I didn't understand that knowledge is also politics. And it helped me to understand it recently, reading in a magazine that came across the desk where I'm at, that said the man who would be king. And it said it was the FBI's most imaginative idea yet in its campaign against Martin Luther King. The Bureau was already wiretapping his phones, bugging his hotel rooms, and planting smear articles in the press aimed at
quote, neutralizing King as an effective Negro leader, unquote. The new plan went a step further. It proposed that the FBI handpick a moderate black leader to put in King's place as soon as, in quotes, King has been completely discredited, unquote, by the Bureau. The FBI candidate to be King's replacement, the man the Bureau referred to as the right kind of national Negro leader, unquote, is none other than Samuel R. Pierce, Jr., currently the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the only black in the President Reagan's cabinet. The FBI's dream of replacing Reverend King with Pierce came 4 months after King expressed his own dream of racial equality at the massive 1963 March on Washington. I said, God damn. You know, like 4 months after we thought we were on our way, we began to develop what to do to put it back into place. You understand that? 4 months after we thought we were at the height of where we had come in this land, they had already begun a plan. You understand? They were going to set down the man they thought was causing them too much trouble. And that's only half the story. And y'all know me. The story about Brother Malcolm ain't going to never be in here. Ain't going to never be written in here. If they thought 4 months about putting down Martin Luther King, what were they thinking about Malcolm? No different than they were thinking about Garvey. Right? Understand it. But it's important for this to go on. And I want to tell you something, brother. Samuel R. Pierce is on the board of directors of Cornell University. So me and you may be on the other side of the line. No, I ain't foolish. But there's some things can't be overlooked. There's some things can't be overlooked. When I picked this up, I had no plan to say this. When I saw this day before yesterday, I said, ain't no way I cannot say this. Because most of us been reading it for the last year and a half. 2 years. That J. Edgar Hoover. They talking about Bobby Kennedy and Hofstra. That ain't nothing to what went on between J. Edgar Hoover and Martin Luther King in this country. J. Edgar Hoover, who was a stomp punk, was a stomp down punk. You understand me? Ain't nobody in this country denies that. You ain't never seen him in the company of women. He's always been with his assistant director. And he got paranoid till you couldn't even shake his hand. I'm not lying to you. You ask yourself why it is that everybody from Kennedy on up to Nixon tried to retire him. Each of them said he was over the retirement, the legally mandated age, and they couldn't retire him. Some of y'all read it in the paper. Y'all know it. Each time they tried to retire him, he said no. And all them presidents backed up. Why? Because he understood there's only one way to really keep a secret. To have more on the people who would talk, to make it so expensive for them to talk, they did not talk. You don't have no secret by telling people don't tell nobody. We know that. Go and tell your main partner. Hey, look here, man, don't tell nobody. My old lady just left me. Man, see, you get up the street, he done told so-and-so, then told Sonny, then told Bubba, and everybody didn't know. No, seriously. Very seriously. Extremely seriously. When they talk about James Hoffa and Bobby Kennedy, that was nothing. But I want you to listen. Said the FBI proposed, set forth in January 8, 1964 memorandum, was the brainchild of Assistant Director William Sullivan. Pierce at that time an up-and-coming lawyer with no apparent connection to the civil rights movement. No apparent connection at all to that point of struggle of our people. Does have, this is FBI talk, does have all the qualifications of the kind of Negro I have in mind. unquote, wrote Sullivan in the memo. Sullivan's memo could be among the most patronizing prose since Gone with the Wind, says the author of this article. You know what Gone with the Wind was, right? The first step in the plan was, quote, to take King off his pedestal so that he no longer would be deceiving and misleading Negro people, close quote. At this time, the confused Negro people, isn't this interesting? The confused Negro people. I want y'all to see, I don't want you to believe me, I want you to go buy it. I don't usually, advertise this stuff. But June 1983, something called Mother Jones. It's supposed to be the liberal left, you see. It's important to read them because they'll print stuff at the New York Times or the Daily News or the Washington Post will never print. You ain't gonna read this in the Daily New York Post. Sullivan's memo could be among the most patronizing prose. The first in the step of a plan to set King off his pedestal, so that he could no longer be deceiving and misleading the Negro people. At this point, the confused Negro people would be left without a national leader of significant, compelling personality to steer them in the proper direction. Can I read that again? They would be, the confused Negro people would be left without a national leader of significant, compelling personality to steer them in the proper direction. End of quote. Enter Pierce, who would steer the 20 million Negroes away from communism. Sullivan concluded, it would be the most helpful to have a man like Pierce leading the Negro people, to whom we could go if necessary, and rely upon in sensitive matters. J. Edgar Hoover responded to Sullivan's memo with rare praise. It was rare for him to give out praise, but he gave praise out to this plan. In fairness to Pierce, he adamantly denied any connection with the Bureau about his candidacy. No documents have been found to indicate that the plan ever was acted on. But there is no mystery as to why the FBI's right kind of Negro leader was also Ronald Reagan's right kind of Negro leader. A Republican stalwart, Pierce was the general counsel to Nixon's Treasury Department and first black to sit on two corporate boards, Prudential and General Electric. As HUD Secretary, Pierce has advocated supply-side policies of cutting housing assistance to the poor, causing one member of Congress to denounce him as the Stephen Fletcher who has disdain for the black poor. Pierce, seemingly as the only minority member of the cabinet, has left himself somewhat invisible to the president. While hosting a group of mayors visiting the White House in 1981, Reagan greeted his own member of cabinet, Mr. Samuel Davis, Secretary of HUD with a handshake and said, "Hello, Mr. Mayor," somehow confusing him with Richard Hatchett of Gary, Indiana. There ain't no way that you could confuse Samuel Pierce with Hatchett, unless you're just not even looking at either one of them. It occurred to me that in looking at that piece, that it becomes important for us as a people to understand that the most profound aspects of oppression are not those that appear outside of us, but those that are inside of us. The way we look at ourselves in relationship to others. And I want to try to make that message very plain and very clear. I was coming up on the train earlier, saw a little young black woman uncurling her long braids down up here to her, like her bust line. And she just was doing it in the train with such glee. And then suddenly it appeared to me that from here down was not her hair. That this woman had horsehair dripping down her side and was so proud to do that on the E-train because she thought that made her something else. Let's be clear. She thought it made her something else. It gave her something as a person that she thought she could sit there and unbraid her hair on the train in front of all them white folks. That's what she was thinking. You know it and I know it. Right? Like most of us would not comb our hair in front of white folks in school, right? We wait for them to go out before we comb our hair, right? Sure we would. And wish we could do with our hair like they do with theirs. Put it up under the water and just do it back like that with a comb. It is so obvious to us, but yet it's still so important. We could talk all about sophisticated theories of identity and psychology and Freud, but the point is we all know it in our lives. What is important fundamentally about how you look at the world around you is the way you come at it from inside yourself. How you look at it. You know, there was a European philosopher by the name of Kierkegaard who said, you have to look backwards before you can look forward. He wasn't saying nothing more than Frederick Douglass said. A man without a knowledge of his history is like a tree without any roots. Same thing, more beautiful perhaps. They call it classical and call him a slave. They call what we do jazz and bebop and call what they do classical. It's up to you. If you want to go for it, then you're going to go with them. It's going to be classical. And what you do is by definition always going to be less than what they do. If you accept what they do is classical and what you do is something else. Ain't no way you can get around that. That is so fundamental to the law of nature, ain't no way you can get around it. If you look out at the world and wish to be them, you can never be anything else other than less than what you are in your own mind's eye. Ain't no way to get around that. There is no fundamental way to get around that. You can't get around it. They can come say that's unimportant. That's a lie. The life of a people is based upon how they look upon themselves, how they respect who they are, how they want to preserve what they are, how they have cultural values that they want for themselves, and how they want to be with each other. Once they lose that, they cease to be a people. They may be something else. They may be something else. They may be something else, but they will not be the people they once were. And I say these are very critical times for us. Of course, you know the obvious things are happening to us. We're losing jobs. We're losing places to live. We're putting more and more young people up in the joint. I tell people all the time, if a Martian was shooting a satellite down here and landed in Auburn or Green Haven or Coxsackie or Elmira, he'd think he was in Africa. It took him a while to know that he was in the holding pens of the people who were the masters of this land. Right? You always see who's on bottom by looking at who's in the prisons. I didn't learn that at Northwestern. I learned that by listening to a black man who writes for Ebony named Lerone Bennett. One day in the meeting in the Afro Arts Theater in Chicago. And I tell everybody when I went back there, that was like being second home. And Lerone Bennett said once, you tell the order of society when you look at who's at bottom. I wish there's a lot I could go in with this evening. But I want to tell you something. Don't not watch that trial taking place in Nyack, New York. Don't not watch that trial. Don't let them tell you what those brothers were up to in Brinks is what they were up to. Of course, the most daring and successful thing we have done as an act of resistance have been those brothers who freed Joanne Chesimard. And she ain't been found yet. And she ain't been found yet. They have kicked in people's doors up on Morningside Avenue. They've busted all into people's homes in Brooklyn. And she ain't been found yet. And that's clear. If there ain't an act of resistance among an oppressed people, they are through. If there is not an act of resistance, they are through. That sounds easy to say. But why do I say it? Unemployment among adult black people is up to over 30%. They talk about this being a shooting gallery around the corner. What should it be? Are there bankers' sons around you? They learn about stocks and bonds? These people talking about forsaking the educational system. Between the ages of 17 and 25, unemployment is over 65%. And right here in this town of New York City, the Public Housing Authority says that it has evidence that over 17,000 black families are living double up in the housing projects. And they say they're violating the law. And they say that's only the tip of the iceberg. They can't even go to deal with it because it's so deep. You understand the nature of how serious it is. It is even more serious for us than during the Great Depression, and I want to tell you why. Because in the 1929s and 1930s, most of us were not sitting here in these cities. Most of us were in largely small towns, in rural areas, where we canned and raised our food and had animals. We were at that time over 70% in rural and small towns. We are now the most urbanized population in these United States. By the latest 1980 census, we are the most urbanized people. At a time at which industrial jobs are declining. What they call the fall of the old smokestack industries. All the things that my daddy and your daddy and maybe your grandparents left the South for to come work in the industrial factories and mines and packing houses. The greatest wave of black people out the South since the Depression was after World War II, or during World War II. All of them coming, seeking jobs in the new war industry, and the subsequent industrial jobs. All those jobs that are now going. Recently in Washington, just last week, the major heads of industrial corporations met, and they said that these jobs, these people laid off, most of them not going to be hired again, even when the economy picks up. Because you know what they're going to? Computers, microchips, increasing the use of robots in the line of production. Most of the black people who came to Detroit to work in General Motors and Chrysler and Ford are not going back to work. And at the same time, there's a decrease in all kinds of investment going outside our community. That's why all these buildings standing up there. Where people once were living, they now got cement blocking it up. Extremely important. Most everybody in the country admits that America is in the greatest period of crisis since the Depression. What they won't say is how it affects people in the society differently. See? There are some who say that race don't matter no more. That black people are as equal as everybody else. They didn't have their day. That they're all middle class. Right? Yeah. I ain't lying to you. Man by the name of Scanlon in Rottenburg. They say all the black people are middle class because of affirmative action. They're getting jobs before everybody else. You know what they say out there where I'm at? That the best thing to get a job is to be black and to be a woman. Is that real? The hardest thing to get a job is out there to be is a black and a woman and got some children. You know? See, there's two sides of it. The census say the poorest group in American society right now are black women with children. They more poor than elderly people who ain't working no more. They say race don't matter anymore. There ain't no need for affirmative action. That everybody's at the same position. But we've learned a couple other things now. That who you make coalitions with to advance what you perceive to be your interest has everything to do with the way you look at yourself and others. See, one thing that happens to us is that we fall in love with people. You know, it's like the relationship we have one another. We don't see people as being able to work with us for something right now, and when they don't work with us, we say, hey, later. But we fall in love with people. We start falling all over ourselves, talking about how their condition has been like ours. They went into Moses like we went into slavery. You know, they went up into Egypt and we went into slavery. We all the same people. What? And we was paying them the rent. How are we the same people? No. Huh? They say, oh no, we fall all over in love, right? Start complimenting people more than they need to be complimented. God, so we was complimenting them so much, even at the March on Washington, they determined who could speak and who couldn't speak at our march. Right? Told who could come up there and speak for us and who could. Told all them young brothers from Smith, you could not deliver that speech. They said, if you don't let my people go, we're going to come through the South like Sherman marched through and there'd be fire in the field. And they said, you're not going to deliver that speech, John L. Lewis. Ain't none of y'all going to climb up on this podium before national TV and deliver that speech. They said, we'll have Bert, what's his name, Lancaster, read it for you. Can you imagine that? The same thing. But then they was using Bert Lancaster because they thought we went for Tarzan. But they said, in our speech, who would be in control? One of the things we've learned at this point is how do a people in our position make effective coalitions? That's everything how to do it, how you understand ourselves. It became clear to me as I began to think about the situation that we're in, is that we have yet to become clear as to who we are in this society. And you know that's not a new question. That's an old question with us. If you go back and read meetings like this, in 1910, 1915, we were still wrestling with these questions. You go back into the 18th century, go back into the 17th century, we had meetings arguing these same things. You know the only place you don't find these arguments is when we was free. When we was in Africa, we didn't have these kinds of meetings. What we had meetings about was what was going to be the order of government of the day. How we was going to regulate commerce. How we were going to regulate the expansion of the things we were doing. How we were going to create art and advance learning and take care of our young. It only became a question after we were no longer free. Again, it sounds so simple, don't it? But what's important about that? That the most important thing about not being free is the way you think. Not being free had anything to do with the fact that you somehow are tied down. Carter Woodson said, he said, you know, you can educate a people in such a way that their very nature will demand a back door, even when there ain't no back door. Right. And what he called a miseducation of the Negro. Right? He said you can fix them so they will behave just as you want them to behave. He was before Freud. He was before Pavlov. That is simply that the mark effect of oppression is that you condition people. When the things happen to us, you condition us not to respond to the people who want most of us to be free. Right? Look how much we flee from Frederick Douglass for cling to Booker T. How we don't even talk about Martin Delany. Right? How we talk about the founding of the NAACP and not the United Negro Improvement Association. How we talk about the need to have a Martin Luther King birthday, but not one of Malik El-Shabazz. The people who want us most to be free, we flee from. We flee from. Is that natural? To flee from the people who want most for you? Other than if you're conditioned in your response. I sat up in the university class and thought about how many times I've seen black people walk away from a brother trying to sell them a Muhammad Speaks. Muhammad Speaks says, no, I don't want that. Get away from me. And go pick up the Daily News. I mean, I don't know how you justify that. Pick up the Daily News. Or in those days, the Daily Mirror. And that thing was up, something us up and down. Brother said, I give it to you, sister. Take the Muhammad. No, I don't want it. You're in the pit of Harlem. Everybody's black here. Take the paper. And you're still afraid to take the paper. You understand now what I mean? Understand the level of conditioning, right? Most important thing about not being free is the way you think. Right? You find some black people have a job, they're afraid to talk to you if the white people say it about it. When I was a kid growing up here in these streets, I got whooped over here in the Lincoln Projects one day over on 33rd Street by some black policemen who told me they was whooping me so the whites wouldn't have to whoop me. I said, what? I said, I look for you to hold them up off me. When you run out of these little jitterbugs, you be up in your little project apartments, the red light and stuff, be dancing all like that. Police bust the door and all right, everybody up out the wall. Be taking all your cigarettes out your pocket, emptying out whatnot. You go, oh God, here we go. On down to the tombs. And you expect at least the black policeman would make the difference. And the question is, does he make the difference? We answer that from the nature of our experience. Not from what somebody tells us. There's only one real wisdom, what you know by having tried it and see what is true and what isn't. Does he make the difference? Other things we thought about ourselves in the nature of our place in this land. There are black mayors in Detroit. There are black mayors in Gary. There are black mayors in Washington, D.C. There are black mayors in Atlanta and Newark and in Los Angeles. The question is, what difference does it make? A black woman in Los Angeles come out to shoo off the electrical company men from cutting off her electricity. They called the police and shot her down in Los Angeles while the black mayor sat there. I ask you, what difference does it make? A young black athlete was coming home, and the police caught him in a chokehold, took him to the prison, and he died in there like Steve Biko did. The question becomes, what difference does it make? We have pursued for the last 15 years a goal predicated upon the fact that ultimately who we are doesn't really make a difference in this land, and we can be like everybody else. And we're in a period of most severe difficulty since we left the South, coming north to freedom. Coming north to freedom. And so we have to understand ourselves in the context of these times in terms of what our experience is. You see, because what becomes important about every act of oppression in history is that the first thing it seeks to do in order to become stable and effective is change the way the people think. That's why with every gunboat that went to Africa in slavery, a missionary boat followed it. And it was the missionaries who set up the schools. That's the only reason why you can have black people in Accra, Ghana, and in Barbados singing "Hail, Hail the Queen." Ain't no way you could have that happen when all the British had been for those people have been misery, death, and enslavement. But at least we get to feeling comfortable. It ain't much different for us. The people who set up Fred Hampton were black. Y'all don't know Fred Hampton, do you? And that's the tragedy of our community. We disconnected. When I was out in Chicago, Fred Hampton was a brilliant young brother. Many people said he was almost in the image of Malcolm, but young. When I first met him, he was in the youth league of Maywood, Illinois, of the NAACP. Because he was always concerned with his people. He wound up as a leading organizer of the Panther Party in all of Chicago. And the police went in one night, in the middle of the night, and killed him and Mark Clarke right up in the midst of Southside Chicago, and all in black people. And it's taken his family up to now to win anything near like a legal case. We have been Negroes, we have been colors. In my day, we were spooks, boots, splits. And now we are bloods, everything but Africa. And the interesting thing, we even able to call ourselves black before we can call ourselves African. And we thought that was an improvement, because it was. We had a whole lot of difficult time calling ourselves black for most of the time I've been around here. But now calling ourselves black is easier than calling ourselves African. Because once you understand yourself as African, you understand yourself within the context of a national history. You understand that I wasn't always this way. Then you ask yourself, what was I like before I was this way? And that's the question I asked. I walked around here in the Frederick Douglass bookstore, talked to old Richard B. Moore. He said, take this Richard Boltnick, Ruins of Empire, and read it. Take your time about it, but read it. Only person told me, without question, that he had faith I could read it. And I took it. And he said, then later maybe you want to look at James Preston, The Dawns of Civilization. And that sounds difficult. But it wasn't. I was ordinary. First of 7 children, living up here in the project, run around here in the street with the El Quintos and the sportsmen and the enchanters, carrying on out of Coney Island with the bishops and the chaplains, damn near getting ourselves killed. One of the things that's very interesting about that history, the last time I saw Norman 3X, who's in prison, supposedly one of those who killed Malcolm, was when we were going to school, the Central Needle Trade. And he was in the chaplains in Brooklyn, and I was in the sportsmen in New York. The last time I saw him, because that time the school changed. We came in and they had to leave. And I saw him, he was up at 155th Street at the Rockland Palace at a Muslim bazaar. But that's important. Nobody in Harlem believes that Norman 3X was involved in the assassination of Malcolm, but he sits in jail. Everybody who was around at that time has come out now said, no, he was not involved. Only one man there who sits was involved. And he said it on 60 Minutes and asked for it to be opened up again completely, to be looked at. And that will tell a piece of our history that is now blocked off to us, as was the history of our forefathers blocked off to us. And when something is blocked off from you, you can't know it. And if you don't know it, you are that much lost because you don't know it. And because we didn't know a great deal of what our history of our ancestors were, we thought what anybody told us about ourselves was adequate. We thought that we were really the Africans we saw in the Tarzan movie. And so it became clear to me when we went to the movie why always the black people were so embarrassed. Because they thought that was real Africa. That was the only representation we had of ourselves before we were enslaved. And it didn't look good. But later we come to understand that none of those movies were ever made in Africa. They were made right down here in the Everglades in Florida, where they got crocodiles. But there was another hint if we had looked independently. There are no tigers in Africa. Right? The only place there are tigers is in Asia. But in all them Tarzan movies, they had man-eating tigers running around eating up the Africans, right? And when you see that movie next on the Late Late Show, look and you will see that most of those so-called Africans had processed heads. They were simply black people they picked up off the street and hired here. My point is, if we believe so profoundly that was Africa, then what do we really know? You understand me? How much of people can manufacture reality for us that we believe it. Something they did through a little old telescope down there in Florida in the Everglades. That's all the cameras that made us. So telescoped our vision to make us believe that that was Africa. But the mark of a free people are those who search for their own sources of information, who see in the best of their own a reference for knowledge, who understand that the path to freedom is to begin to study on their own the history of who they are and where they've come from. And in the process of doing that, they free themselves by naming themselves. They name themselves each step of the way of their development of their consciousness. We went from nigger to Negro, from that to black, and the next step is to African. And when we do that, no, please be clear. What we do that is that we understand that we are hooked to an international history that involves us as we sit here. One of the most dramatic things that's happened in the last 2 days in the lives of African people has been a major advance in the struggle in South Africa. As it is. A major advance. Those people who said that those black people could not know how to mount serious struggle. Before that, they hit the atomic, plant. Before that, they hit the South Soul gasification plant. Before that, they hit the banks. Before that, they went after one of the generals. It becomes important for us to know that. I want to tell you why. These times are so hard for us that we go any place for work, even into the army. We sometimes encourage our young to go. And the fact of the matter is, brothers and sisters, that the U.S. military is now becoming overwhelmingly black. While we applaud the advance of the liberation struggle in South Africa, we must ask ourselves, for God's sake, will that become another Vietnam? And what will that mean for our young? Can we relate to the question of peace? Can we relate to the question of anti-war? Can we relate to the question against nuclear proliferation? Because we think it doesn't affect us. It took Martin to come all the way to that at the end of his life, right? And we began to say, those things don't have no business with us. He said, we don't have no mind with those things, didn't it? He said, we don't study war no more. He said, war in any circumstance is evil. You know how much you can be affected by the way you were taught? That we would, on the one hand, learn in Bible school that war should be studied no more. Knock your blades into plowshares. But then watch and see men of the cloth blessing young men to go to war. And think somehow that was all right? That's a major contradiction. But see how your mind can get twisted? You don't see your own reality? You sit there and accept that. In God we trust. We're going to win because God's on our side. What God has to do with decimating the Japanese and not the Germans, who started it all in the first place, who thought themselves the master race in the areas. Really, the Japanese was fighting against all that white supremacy. It's another kind of question. But what will the advance in Southern Africa mean for us? We need now more than ever to understand ourselves in terms of our own experience. We are an African people who have served for the most part as chattel and labor for over 3 centuries in this land. We have only for the last 40 years, 30 to 40 years, in any way be considered somehow inside and a part of. That largely due to the fact that the whole world was changing. And if this land was to win favor in Africa and Asia, it had to show that it was treating its own African people different. There were those who would like to pick our leaders for us, determine who would represent how hard we suffer and what the nature of our oppression is. But that can only happen if we allow it to happen. We must understand the nature of our history such that we know that we must foremost be in command of those who speak for us. I want to say to you this afternoon, brothers and sisters, if we give up that struggle, we don't have any. There is nobody who can speak for us other than he who we determined to speak for us. If we allow anybody else to speak for us other than those that we say in fact speak for us, then we will not have us represented. It won't be on 60 Minutes. It won't be on ABC. It won't be with Roger Mudd. It won't be with Dan Rather. It won't be with David Susskind. It won't be with any of them. With Brian Gumbel. You understand? And now, more than ever, we need to have our own voice. There were those not only 4 months after the March on Washington saw it necessary to begin to engineer a plan, to put it into place, to keep this historically oppressed African people continued in their oppression in America. It continues to this day. It was determined that there would not be certain leaders. And it was hoped that these people, in their confusion, would give up the pursuit of knowledge about themselves, and that they would forsake those who, in fact, have been their most outstanding warriors. And it is perhaps now more than ever that there is deep concern about that. If it was a concern in Malcolm's time and in Martin's time, have no illusion that it is a concern in these times. Everybody who speaks before this podium takes that risk. Be clear, because that's what time it is. Anybody's going to say, in the face of all the distortion in the national media, that times are not getting better, that we don't see no recovery, that there is no trickle-down effect, that supply side is not feeding our children or better in the schools. Anybody who says that today will clearly be understood to be on the other side. There's never been any advancement in our history without risk. I don't just talk the talk. But you know, I remember something that H. Rap Brown said. He said, you know, it's all right to say, yeah, right on. But then after I'm gone, there's nothing else to be said. And that's a testament to history. You understand? That's a testament to history. And we don't even ask where these young brothers are, whether their backs have been broken by their resistance. Some of us have seen them, like James Foreman from Smith. We don't even know where Brother James Shabazz, who is Malcolm's main young assistant who graduated from Lincoln University. Right? Some of us remember that brilliant young brother. Where is he? And how is he holding up? It becomes a very important question that we become concerned about who speaks for us, but also determine who speaks for us. Because there are those who always create their own to speak in our name. Here they had already begun to groom. That's always happened in every period of our history. The most important thing was to set down the major national leader. During every act of rebellion and resistance of Africans against slavery, the point was to set down those who were rebellious. And I wish you would go with Dr. Ben. But also go to Senegal. See those slave forts. And look at where they kept the Africans up underneath the steps. Those who were the most resistant. Some of y'all have seen it. Where they left them so that the rain and the cold air would drip on them to break the back of their resistance. And they tell it to you as you go through the tour. They tell it right to you. And they tell you which Africans they wanted to break most of all. The history of African struggle in Brazil and Central America is important because they showed how to break the back of a people's resistance, you must reorientate their concept of themselves. Here they took away the people's religion, took their language away. In Palmares, where they had the most advanced resistance, those people held on to religion and language, which were vehicles for culture and ideas among themselves. That just simply means that our task is more difficult. It by no way means it's impossible. Ours has been one of the most gallant struggles of human liberation in the history of this human race. It has been one of the most gallant. No one gave odds that we would make it. No one would have gave betting odds on us, but we have. But we're at a difficult period that challenges us like never before. I want to leave with one last point. Dr. Ben, when he was making comment about our working together, said somehow, up there where you teach is a very hard existence. And I want you to think a moment on one last point in relationship to the overall point I'm trying to make. What happens to you when you're taken out of the surrounding where you are now, with all of the things that you know and all of the people that you take to be real, and you're put into one situation where that doesn't exist anymore? What happens to how you think about things? Think about how, at the height of our resistance in the mid-1965, 66, 67, something developed called a better chance, upward bound. Young black people were taken out of their natural habitat and carried off to another habitat, where they sometimes were the only black people in the whole circumstance. Now you think for a minute. Would they be the same kind of person as if they were in an environment where everybody around them was black? See? Understanding that how you behave is determined by the people around you. Because you take your cues from how to behave from the things you see around you. And those that you believe are those that you listen to. Right? What you learn in this habitat is to listen to others and not to trust your own ear. We have had that happen to us in the last 18 years in the name of integration. What has that meant? That has meant that it has created a social division, a social spread among black people that has never existed before in our history. There are some black people who live different realities from each other and therefore see the world very different. And the question is, can we allow simply the fact that someone looks like us to be sufficient for determining who speaks for us? That's the question that you have to ask. J. Edgar Hoover's plan was based upon the assumption that we were so confused that anybody who happened to look like us would pass for being a spokesman for us. That we had no understanding of who we are and what our conditions are to determine who is best to think, to speak for us. We have gone through this kind of division. It used to be time that Sugar Hill was part of Harlem. Sugar Hill is gone, and all those who were in Sugar Hill are gone too. The question is, what does that mean? Do we have a leadership at this point that speaks? So there's a great deal of concern at this point at what direction will the black voice go in the 1980s. And there are many who expect that since our condition is the most severe in the society, that we will be those who will lead what the direction should be. And we need to say very conditions of oppression have not measurably changed for the great bulk of us. That the great promise of our having been included along with everybody else has not happened. We need to say further that there are those who would want to close the door on us at this point. And therefore that means that we must raise the question of what is independence for our own future. That the national liberation struggle must in fact raise for us the question of our being self-determined, ability to govern ourselves, to speak in our own behalf, and where we are the majority, we hold the power. And that our relationships with others are based upon what they will do for us in return for what we will give them in support. No more leadership that asks for us to give 94 to 96% of our support for some candidate who after that then turns us out before we finish our term. Who then in fact offers no relief for what our conditions are. And we must say further that the deep crisis of American economy affects us harder than everybody else. And a society based on the base of the pursuit of profit over the value of human welfare is never a society that can set us free. Thank you.
Your presentation is one that is this part. I say this, and I'm coming to that question. Because I have been listening for a long time for someone who is of the African origins, of the African American race, to come up at this juncture in history, which is indeed crucial and pivotal. I'm referring to the most explosive situation taking place, not in the Middle East, not in Lebanon, not in Latin America, but in South Africa.
Yes.
Many of us, unfortunately, have been somewhat resisting discussions on that very volatile and explosive scenario takes place in South Africa. Now, I have been deeply concerned that each and every African on this planet, not only on the continent, but in the United States, in the Caribbean, should be more knowledgeable about the situation. Unfortunately, we are not. How is it possible? Can we elucidate somewhat how we can reach our people? Of course, some of us are being reached by these lectures, forums, by WLIB, by Night Talk, and different lectures. But do you think that the church would play a more formative role or any other organization? Because we must be reached. It's very crucial. It is so crucial that even McNamara, in addressing white students at this water brand in South Africa, said that this conversation will impact blacks in America under white.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you, brother. You raise a very important question. And you're right that the ex-Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, speaking in South Africa, recently told not only students, but a gathering of the elite, the white elites in South Africa, that they were on a collision course, and that if they did not begin to redirect that course, that it was clear to everybody who saw it, he's a military man, that they in fact were on a course that was going to take them into a major Holocaust. And he said that they should not expect that the United States would come to its aid. That's what he told them. Well, that's a question that yet to be determined. Whether the United States will go to those white folks' aid. The United States at this point is giving South Africa some of the most sophisticated military weapons and military technology, like they're doing Israel as well.
Yes, he did say it was going to be a major question. Most of the policy analysts in this country are concerned with what are we going to do? How do we feel about it? And some of you have heard that there have been some discussion about the fact that the military is so black now. Some of y'all have been reading in the paper, and they've been talking about it not being so reliable. They don't mean that people can't shoot a gun. What they mean, are they politically reliable? But all these black people are there, can that possibly be that they would go up? Wouldn't that be a tragic turn in history? That there we would be aiming a gun across some, foxhole at another black person trying to fight against racial oppression. But the world is not, always the way it should be. There are a lot of black people, a lot of Africans in the employ of South Africa, fighting for them. But yes, McNamara did say that. Your question was, what could we do? I think you've said some of the things. All the things that are being done, we ought to see that they're done. Let me try to say something that when I was at one point early in my life, I often used to think was not important. I think it is very important now, if you hear a show on the radio, call up 10 different times to say how bad it was and how you dug it. Because that's the politics of communications. If you see something in the newspaper, write all kinds of articles in and say how hip it was. I don't care if it takes you but 5 minutes. These people determine who out there is watching by the things they get in. Now, that's something we have to do. We can't leave, brothers like, the brother on Like It Is out there by himself. Then say we dig it. Then when they come for him, we're not even there. And then we say we're going to be more in the dark without him. So if we seek in light, we ought to defend those things that are trying to give us some ray of light. The other thing, when you ask about the churches, one of the things that I think is so important about this church is that, in fact, it's open for this kind of thing, and it should happen more. But let me suggest one small dramatic thing. Y'all know that in front of a lot of other houses of worship around this city and in these United States, a thing called Free Southern Jewry. What I'd like to see is every black church on Sunday have a sign out in front, "End Apartheid in South Africa." That's all. Just go ask your minister, ask the minister to put that kind of sign up. After a while, people see it all the time. They got to start asking questions. What's this about? Somebody has to talk about it in church. It'll trigger a whole discussion in church, right? Because the board of deacons ain't going to go for it right off. And that's going to stir a whole lot of discussion. The young people are going to get involved. And that whole community will be educated around it. Yes, sir. Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Before I ask my question, I would like to make a comment, and my comment is, 2 years ago, Tony Brown interviewed some young black soldiers in the military, and when asking one of them a question, the answer was, they have trained us too well to do us wrong. And my question is, you, at the beginning of your presentation, spoke about politics. Later on, you mentioned what difference does it make in looking at all of the negative now. You also spoke about leadership, and then you talked about choosing a voice. I would like to know, what do you feel? How do you feel our chances of electing a black president? How do we go about choosing a candidate to run for election? And are we worthy of taking on such an election at such time?
Okay. Thanks very much, brother. Very important question. My answer to the latter part of the question, are we worthy? My answer is yes, we are. No question that we are. All right? We've proven in every respect that we are, and it's a question that doesn't need to be proved. We are worthy simply on the basis that we have to have a voice in those things that affect us. Now, when you ask about can we elect a black president, my answer to that is no. All right? No. And I'm clear about that. I don't expect that. I have no dreams about that. I don't fantasize. I don't go off in a daydream about it. No. All right? But should we, in fact, be involved in mounting a candidate who might run? That's a different question. For those of us who are in the electoral system, who go and vote, The question is to vote in the most intelligent and politically efficient way to vote. Just don't go to vote. It's like being called to be on the jury. And you just sit there and don't ask yourself, whoa, what has this got to do with me as a black person? Then I'm on here. Just don't be led by these other people. See? It only means something for us if we make it mean something for us. All right? So if you're going to vote, then the question becomes how to vote most effectively. It seems to me, those of us who like to vote, who believe that it's the way to be socially responsible, to exercise our rights as American citizens, as good civic all right? That if we're going to do that, then we got to vote differently than the way we've been voting since Roosevelt. That's just come claim. Just jumping up and voting for the Democrat ain't just enough. Just because he says he's going to be for us. We got to stop being tripped out by things that don't have to do with what is real. So, Roosevelt never came to talk to us, but Eleanor did. John Kennedy had a pompadour on his head. What that had to do with us? All right? The question is how to do that effectively. Seems to me to run an independent black candidate who comes up from here as a result of a series of community, local, ward meetings, and who is going to go out there and raise the question about what's happening here is the person that we support. Not because he's going to win, but because he's going to raise the issues. Then he's going to say, if you want our support, here's what we want. Clear, open, and straight up. Ain't got nothing to do with being in love with you. Ain't no reason why there ought to be Bobby Kennedy and J.F. Kennedy's picture on all these black people's walls. If you're going to deal with history accurately, when these young civil rights leaders asked JFK to come to Little Rock, Arkansas and walk with those black girls hand to hand, he laughed them out the White House. He said, you got to be crazy. I'm not going down here and risk my political career. They said, demonstrate for the world that you believe that they are part of America. And he laughed them out of the room. Ain't no reason that we should be that sentimental that we don't understand what's real. No, we don't go out there because he's Jimmy Carter and because Andy Young tells us to go for him. We go for it for what we say he says and we know he's going to do for us. If he doesn't do it, then the next time we turn in the other direction. And if that don't begin to work for us, then we give it up and say, then cut us our own. Keep playing in the electoral system, whether or not it cuts us free is unintelligent. We say, yes, if you say we're Americans, if you say this is a democratic system, then we say this is what it is. If y'all won't do it, then we're going for something else. Then freedom means something else. But for some of us, we've got to test whether that which we said means freedom is freedom. And we're not really testing it. We let people come to us, spill all over us, and come to a church, and then we vote for them. I mean, look, what I made allusion to earlier before about us having voted 96% and not finishing out the term was Andrew Young. It would not have been for Andrew Young, Carter would have never made it as a Democratic candidate. All other black leaders was against, Carter because he's from the South. It was Andrew Young, whose job in the civil rights movement was to keep the little black book for Martin Luther King. He went around to all the churches and set up the meetings for Martin Luther King. So he had the most valuable thing in his possession. When he decided to back Jimmy Carter, he took them around to all these black churches. The first introduction to Jimmy Carter to the black community was in a church. And then the black leaders started to come around. Before it was over, Jimmy Carter had told Vernon Jordan that he was being arrogant. He had told Andy Young that he had to go because Andy Young only said in public what they told him they was going to go for, which was that they saw some right to the freedom of the Palestinian people. Now, we can't be so blind because we're sentimental that some people can come and say they were 2,000 years ago there. Then by that, we ought to have all Africa. And the Indians ought to have America. So, it sounds like I'm overstating the case, but I'm really not. If some people can go and say that they belong in a place because they've been away from it for 200 centuries, and these other people have been there, then Indian Dennis Banks can say all this is his. But the fact of the matter is he's hiding, isn't he? And they taking theirs. So the question is whether or not that serves our interest. Carter turned them all out. Now, if we've given 96 and 90+% of our vote, and what does it deliver us? Is continued difficulty where we live, then what does that mean for us? You just don't keep doing it because somebody programmed you to do that when you was in grade school. If it does not deliver unto you what you need. I think that's very important. I don't think we can win. I think the fact of the matter is that we let people who come who have no real interest in being political. What they want to do is use elected office as a career. They want to use it as an achievement symbol. And they run. And they don't ever raise any critical political issues to us when they come. And they don't represent us. Let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you my view, and then I'm going to stop on this. If and that's not likely to happen, was in the Congress, I would pray to all of the wisdom and strength of our ancestors that I'd have the strength to get up and walk out right now. Or stand on that floor and say that American society is in fact destroying black communities in each and every part of the nation where they are. The 13 or 16 black Congress people should be leading that. But you know, when Adam Clayton Powell got threw out, they just reached down and picked another one up, put him right in his place, even though the people said they wanted Adam. And we let somebody run that over us. You see? If we forget that, then of course we will forget Malcolm, and we'll forget Martin, and we'll forget Frederick, and we'll forget Martin Delaney, and it keep on happening to us. So you involve yourself in politics for politics. To learn, to advance, to express your power, and to show wisdom in what you're doing. Most people think now, forget about black people, they're going to vote for Mondale no matter what Mondale says, because they want to get Brother Reagan so bad, they don't even care what Mondale's going to do. If Mondale knows that, what will he do? Do the same thing you do. He do nothing. Because he knows he don't have to do nothing. The cat come up to you and say, look, I want my money, man. And you know he can't do nothing to you, what you going to say? He ain't going to get his money, is he? Only way you're going to even consider him asking you for his money if you ain't got no money yourself, if you think he can do something to you. It is just as simple but important as that. So I say, yes, I don't think we can elect a black, presidential candidate, but I think we need something better out there than what's out there now, because that doesn't lead us anywhere. It is not sharpening our political focuses. And it's like what Malcolm said. It's the difference between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. It's like running from the fox to the wolf. I mean, he was so clear on that when you go back and listen to him. And you understand why he's not with us now. He was so profoundly clear and had a way to make it very simple for us all to see. Now, it's very difficult for us to come to that because we have emotional attachments. So we've been taught in civics class, you just keep on punching your work. But Pavlov said something about that. You can condition chickens and dogs, they can keep on pounding and things going to work. It ain't going to work. Yes, ma'am. About what? Nationalism, yes.
Among other things, your lecture reinforced one of my strong that people have to be brainwashed, thoroughly brainwashed, to work against their own interests.
That's right.
Nationalism to me means that you work
That's right.
for your own people. So I'm concerned by the people who respond to me when they think, now somebody will look at nationalism as violence.
Sure.
When we read correct words, we have to listen to now.
Yeah.
I haven't found a thing there yet that says go out and show all like
Right, as if you could do that.
And this morning in Brooklyn, someone raised a question to Kaki about Amina and Amir Baraka.
Yes.
They're not the nationalists that is about the anti-progressive thing.
Right.
That anyone can be about. As I said, it's so natural to me to do for your own. I think I'm overseas as a nationalist.
Sure.
I think I'm very proud too as a nationalist. So I'm not so concerned about somebody not being nationalism. But what is it that causes people to think that?
Okay. I think you're raising, again, is a very important and beautiful question. I think, first of all, yes, nationalism is very fundamental. Although there are two kinds of nationalisms. There is one nationalism that Marx, for example, explained, he called the nationalism of the big bourgeoisie. That's European imperialism. That was nationalism, too. That is the fact that they would spread themselves all over the world, all right, trying to dominate everybody and take it all for their own. But that's something that you call national chauvinism. That's like national racism. That's like national superiority, where you think you're better than others. But it also means that if your quest is to prove and to acquire profit, you will take everybody else's human welfare away for the simple price of taking your own profit. And so what the Europeans did was solve every one of their problems internally by taking other people's freedom away. When they couldn't feed their own people enough, they sent them abroad to colonize other people. When they didn't have enough natural resources to develop the kind of riches they wanted, they went abroad and took other people's riches and reduced those people to labor. Now, that's one kind of nationalism. There's another kind of nationalism, which is the progressive nationalism, which is the natural nationalism, the antithesis to that nationalism, which is the nationalism of resistance, which is the people who are oppressed rise up and oppose that. They say, no, I'm not going to work in your interest. I'm going to work in my interest. I'm not going to let you use me for your purpose. I want to be used for my purpose. I'm not going to let you turn me into something that I'm not. I want to be me. And they start that in very small, grudging, simple ways. Like maybe one time, the next time we sit down in the church, there'll be more black woolly-haired Christ pictures on the wall. See? They start in those kinds of ways. They start also by taking away Tony dolls from their children and giving their children black dolls. Then they take away Peter, Paul, Jane, Mary, Renee, LaDonna, LaQuana, all the hip names, and they start giving them African names. All of that is a process of those people's development and their resistance. And then they ask themselves, what am I doing this for? If I'm a judge, what is the justice in this case and what is the not justice? Who do I rule for? If I'm defending justice and the badge, how do I act in this behalf? If I'm in the military, what's for justice and what isn't? What's for us? Okay? Now, immediately as I got to those last three things, what happens? You begin to run into power conflicts. Conflicts with those who govern. On the one hand, they resist all forms of nationalism that is progressive to resist. But they will accept some forms. They will accept the form where you take the Tony doll away. They'll even accept the form where you change your name and your religion, but stop there. They honored Jamal Wilkes last night, if you all watched the game, even though he said he was a Muslim. They honor Kareem Abdul-Jabbar all the time. But there was a time when Kareem left Boys High and went out to Los Angeles, and they were having the boycott march on the Olympics, in which, Tommy Smith and John Carlos took their position. They were asking, where was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's position? And he took a position that was like in the middle. He said, I'm going to study and get my degree. And then increasingly he moved away from having any political content to this transformation. So they'll accept some things, you see. So nationalism, even on the part of the people who resist, are good, but it has its limitations. See, I would not want to put Booker T. Washington completely in that camp without serious study and criticism. All right? Because at one point, Booker T. Washington was very prepared to capitulate to the power over us. Even if that allowed us to develop little bourgeoisie, little businessmen, who would be dependent upon the white businessmen, just like they now have in Africa, see? Very different than Henry Highland Garnett, or, a Delaney, whom they never liked, and who have never been perpetuated. Now, move quickly to your point. Why is it that some people who were themselves at one point nationalists badmouth nationalism? Some of the things that they say, of course, is that nationalism doesn't go further. That nationalism just makes black people feel good, but stops. And that a lot of us who are nationalists are really only what they call petty bourgeois nationalists. That is to say, we never bring black people to challenge the nature of America's capitalist order. And that all we do is talk about our African ancestry and our heritage and so forth and so on, which is good, but unless it makes us encounter the nature of American monopoly capitalist oppression, they say that it's limiting. And to that extent, that was a fair criticism, okay? Because there was a period in which many nationalists of our period was prepared just to stop. Somehow we thought if we studied our past, that would free us in and of itself. I used to think that when I was young, listening to all the bells on the street. I thought we could all just stop being ashamed. If we could all stop hating ourselves because we're black, really, we'd somehow be free. And we could just throw off the European's name and throw off his clothes and throw off his religion, we'd be free. But he's still there. that oppression is only one part internal. The next part is also external. And when the internal begins to break down, then they depend on the external, which becomes force. Okay? And that's the thing we did not fully understand. Now, what I think is wrong about those brothers, my own criticism of them, that they have moved off so far in reading somebody else's history and the theory that grows off that history. What they say is that the major contradiction in the world and in the society is class and not race. And that race only comes under class, that all working class people are oppressed the same, and the struggle is against the proletariat, against labor. Okay? My view is that's only partially correct. Of course Marx would write that in 1850. That's all he knew. He was living in Germany and England, which were largely all white societies. The major source of inequality that he saw was class differences between the landed white barons and the white peons. What Marx only began to understand was what the whites were doing to other peoples in their land with slavery and colonialism. So that therefore, yes, we have to recognize not only does white people oppress us, but white people who are capitalists oppress us. But what we also say, we are oppressed as a people. We are oppressed so that all that's important to us must be obliterated. And that the first stage of struggle against imperialism is nationalist development, and it's through national liberation. And that must be constantly developed among our people. They feel that somehow you now have to go on, you get into these and to me that's just a radical version of what the NAACP does. The real question is, if we're going to be free, what will freedom mean? Will it mean immigration? Will it mean being able to govern ourselves and control territory and control labor that we ourselves produce? Will it be able to control the areas where we live so some black people can live there and other black people, if they want to move out into the larger society, can have the right to do that? But those of us who stayed largely among each other would have the right to govern where we are. Those are the hard questions. And I think these brothers who go off the other way and criticize nationalism simply give up the service to their own people. Good afternoon, John. Yes. That didn't help the Indians survive. And some like to think maybe we were superior to the Indians, but we should not get into that. The only thing that helped us to survive was that our labor was needed where theirs wasn't. And theirs was more rebellious than ours at that point because they were in their own homeland. They knew all the terrain. You couldn't grab them easily and put them someplace and hold them there. So they had to be exterminated. That's why labor was brought from outside. When you're brought from outside, you're strange to the situation. And you certainly feel very dependent, just like we still feel now. The reason why we're not often as bold as we would be is that we know who gives us a paycheck. So it's the same situation. But what's changed is the changing demand for us to work. And that is most critical. Because what it does is it throws more of us out on the street to survive any way we can. And let's be clear. There always been some brothers who, just that we grew up with, always gonna run out there in the street and do that too. You know, that's just the way they were. I'm gonna go for it, man, and try to make it. But overwhelmingly, most of us would try to do for each other and try to keep something going and hold on. But when that began to decline, most of us would say we got a right to try to make it any way we can. But the tragedy of it is that it turns around and up on us. That's the tragedy. So here we are unemployed, then we got all of that turning around in on us even further in terms of people struggling to survive, and that begins to disintegrate us as a people. It is tearing at our bowels as a community. It is hard for us to hold on to a sense of family, a sense of bond. Time becomes so hard till we all become warriors with each other. There's one thing to front off in the street when you say, yo, what's happening on, nigga, what's going on? You know there ain't nothing but front. But that's something when the blood means that. Give it up, nigga, I'm gonna take your life. You say, yo, man, it ain't me. Doom, doom, doom. And you dead. You know, on the subway trying to come home from work. You see, that stuff is turning in on us. And the inability to have a chance to make a decent living so we can support our family and our loved ones. That's the critical question. Those are critical problems I think facing us at this point. The decline, the major industrial crisis in America, the decline of the American economy, and what it's doing to us. And I know some of you might want me to say decline of civil rights, decline of affirmative action, rise of racism. See, but all of that is just a fact. Affirmative action don't mean nothing if you have no job to go into. See? Decline of civil rights don't mean nothing if you don't have nothing to support your rights with. None of that means anything if you don't have the fundamental right to take care of yourself and to protect your own and the ones you love. And increasingly that's becoming difficult for us to do with no hint of release on the horizon. And it seems to me that we've got to begin to deal with, talk about that. And begin to start asking ourselves, how do we organize for that? And if in fact it continues to get as bad as it does, and then some people begin to start saying they're going to resist, what is going to happen? They're likely to be the physical response, right? To control us physically. And the question, are we prepared for that? Does understanding lead us to all possibilities? Let me just make it one clear. I know, because mind is a very funny thing. You can't handle certain things you don't want to handle. Most people don't expect to die by any nuclear bomb. But there's some people who have shelters, don't they? Got water down up in it. Got canned goods down up in it. Got air generators down up in it. They just saying, in case that happens, they're prepared for that eventuality. And that's how we ought to think. In case, what are we prepared to do? You see. I see those, if you ask me, as a major threat to us at this point. Thank you. Yes, sister. Good evening, sir. Yes.
And future teachers. And I have been taken from special ed to the special language.
Yeah.
Now I'm going out.
Yeah.
But the main problem that I'm concerned with is communicating with Africa.
Right.
I don't know exactly what else I can do. I don't know to send out with the boy down,
Yeah, right. Sure.
what's going on here. And I'm also going to Dr. James' class.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm really concerned about how can I reach the youth in the educational system. It means now for some assistant teachers,
Right.
in the future when I come here, I'd like to know how can I approach them.
Right. Well, oh boy. You ask a very important question. It's kind of thing that I also struggle with as a teacher. One of the things, obviously, you can't do it alone, okay? That means you've got to have an increasingly large support group around you. You've got to gather around you other black people who feel that way in the district or the unit in which you're working. That's the first thing, really, politically. You've got to try to find those people who you know will give you support. Then, of course, you've got to try to see a range of what you can influence, how you can begin to start defining what those students learn, okay? What they learn. One of the interesting things about the brother's last question was, when I was saying about, or sister was asked about nationalism, is that, yes, they will allow us to do certain things that they feel don't raise too critical a question. But you notice at first, whenever any black person began to talk even about African American history, call yourself African American, right? Change your name in any way, that sends up signals. That sends up balloons. See? Just like what I was reading from. Why do you think they say the Samuel Pierce is the right kind of Negro? They have signals that say this one is not the right kind of one. So that's how much we're watched. And the education of our young is so important. Okay? We've been struggling over that in New York for some time. That's what the Ocean Hill-Brownsville struggle was back. Out of which the East and Jet Tourism and Albert Van, who's now in the state legislature, came out of. But I think the first thing is to get people around you who can support you. Then I think you've got to begin to start trying to organize with those people. What ways can you begin to change the diet, the educational diet that these black children get? Okay? And you've got to ask yourself, how much risk am I able to take? That's what you got to ask yourself. Cold, sober question. How much risk am I able to take? And how much risk will this situation bear? And sometimes you got to be willing to push out just a little bit beyond where you think it is. But you see, I'm not being here flippant. That's not easy. See? Because if you're by yourself, that's rough. That's why you need, to some extent, to have those people close to you. But given the siege that we're up under in this country, it finds that very often there are not very many black people around you who are with you, or who you can depend on will stand with you. So maybe also what we have to determine until you can develop that strength, ways that you can educate those black children that they don't know that you're doing it. Okay? All kinds of side things. Maybe ways that you get involved with their parents. One thing I would suggest is that if in fact before you begin in a particular school, if that's a problem, try to organize some of these other black people who are teachers and start trying to do it outside the school at first. Build up parents' parental support in an independent situation where you might have the kids come on Saturdays. But mainly if you can build the support of parents, then you can begin to move more into the school. But that will be a serious struggle. If there's anything more of concern to the people who control our oppression, if anything more concern to them than talking bad, for those who will teach independently. See? Because immediately what they become concerned about is how will you think after you've learned this? That's all they're concerned with. There's no reason why they're worried about what you listen to. How will you think after you learn this? Most specifically, what will you think about us after you listen to this? You see? And so therefore they watch those who speak and who teach. But you know, as George Jackson once said, another very important young brother, some of you know, in his book, before he died in Soledad, said something that I've always thought was a very interesting passage. He said, we are remarkable as a people. We are the only people who send our young to be trained by those who have admitted by all their acts of history taught us that they don't like us nor want us. So it does not make, in the face of that, our job easier. But I do think that what you have to do is find every creative possibility. Some things that you have to do is try to get those young people out of that setting to other things, like maybe try to organize field trips, things of that sort where you may. Get your church to invite them. You know what a lot of brothers have in these places like in Auburn and in Caxsackie and Greenhaven? They all belong to the NAACP. Not because they're all into the NAACP. They know that's the one thing that the people are allowed in. So I get all these invitations to come speak to the NAACP. What happens inside the NAACP is something else. You see? In there. They know I wouldn't, I'm not coming from the NAACP. But they understand that that's the cover in a sense. I think that's what we have to do. Create things that in many ways are covers until support builds up. And then lastly, I think it's try to help parents understand, and students as well, from a very self-interested point of view. There have been major reports in the national media, which all of you have read, that public education is in just desperate situation. What I thought was interesting about that was to listen to what the white political national leadership was going to say about that. And what the major leadership has said, from the Secretary of Education, Mr. Bell, up to the President, Mr. Reagan, is that the government don't have any responsibility to the public education. Isn't that what he said? Yes. That we can't do anything, we're not going to do anything. He said that ought to be left to the people in their locale. Well, we know what those people do. They either abandon their education and open up so-called private schools where they don't have to deal with us, or they put us aside. So we have to begin to help black parents understand that just sending your kid to the school is not enough. Because the school really isn't taking their interest at heart. And in many respects, people say, well, don't forget about the public school. Especially since most of the public schools in the major industrial cities are blacks and Puerto Ricans. That's from Chicago to New York. That's the major clientele of it. But, again, I would continue to do the things you're doing. I would try to affect children first. Just start arguing for things you could putting up things around the rooms in the class, historical things, trying to get the books changed in the library, okay? Get new materials inside the library. Trying, in fact, in the social studies and the civics course to integrate the things that you've learned in the classes that you've gone, to have world history, treat Africa. Those things may seem so little, but they're so important. If there's a literature class where children learn to read books, make sure that Langston Hughes and, Malcolm X is read, and James Baldwin and Richard Wright are on there, just not, Hemingway or whatever they read, or Huckleberry Finn. You certainly ought to make sure that Huckleberry Finn is being read. See, there are things that you could, without taking too much risk, legitimately do. See, I'm in an all-black school. And you ought to have these things, because history didn't just begin with Europe. Oh, you're not? Okay. And yours? Okay. 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 Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, right. No, I know. Yeah. Well, that moved you here. So you talking to the machine.
I'm definitely getting out of it.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah.
I want to know what I can do after I get my life.
Well, one of the things, I don't know, a thing to maybe begin to start looking at, sister, is education administration to some extent, where you may be able to start moving in to be more the administrator of what happens, and therefore maybe getting in to the systems that you can control some of the districts. Now, that's not easy either, because you know what's happened? There's some other folk in this town. We know what we're talking about. And they have built their position up through controlling the educational system. So every time you bump a district superintendent, a district principal, vice principal, you know who you bump into. And their job is to sit on top of us, not let us bump up into them. You see, so, no, it's not. And then they control the union, right? That controls the licensing, all right? And they understand very clear what the issues are. It's like they say, I put you on an Appleton computer. But, there are some evidence of development. I think they're going to be more. I think the struggle over the chancellor, here was one evidence, and I think we're going to begin to start seeing more like that. What we need is more brothers and sisters who, in fact, are not just black in terms of their exterior, but who have a commitment, who need to be able to be prepared to go into place. But that's only half things. I wish I could tell you that it's not easy. Okay, thanks. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Good evening, Doc.
First, I think that we should realize that black people don't belong in that really does. Some way you don't belong in the first place, that's why you have a problem. Remember, this stolen property. All the people are stolen. But if you want to have this price change on stolen property, you make it out of it. You were slaves and then a minority people. Their language is gone. So you have those together. You don't have to do it here. What do you have? What are you trying to say? What are you doing? You say you're in the past, you're talking about, you said you're saying how to deal with it, you said 100 years of future. And all black people are free in the world. After South Africa, the only one living under 30 million people more living under a white man having treat me as yourself and everything, white man, get away from me. And you have to respect it now. For what?
Why don't you put it into a question, guys? Why don't you just put it in the form? No, but put it in the form of a question, then we could all deal with it.
I have covered Swahili language. That's the language. That's the language for all the people around. So they can speak to themselves and not be European like a trend. And it's Swahili. They got to cover the people with an African language. That's for their project.
So you're saying that you would
like to... They can't go after you. Bring after you. No one of these people, he's bringing here in full force.
Oh.
With language and dress and everything. So when people get a white man who respects you, have to work a lot. When these people are really trying to be your own people and serious about it. Don't try to be an American. You can't be one.
All right. Okay. That's the... Okay, I think, brother... All right, I think... All right. Okay, all right. You understand? All right. Okay. All right. Brother in back, you're going to raise a question, brother. He's right there. No, I understand. You got the answer. You got the answer, sir. That's all right. Okay. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
created something new with this education. I don't know how it is established.
But you have a...
with the second night school in
the physical education.
Whatever it is, all concerned with people come together for the expression of physical activity.
So you asked me how... But I'm sorry, what did you say, bro? Prince Harlem. What's that? Right. Well, it seems to me, one place you might want to do and try to talk to some people in the teachers' union, you know? No, I know it, but I mean, if in fact they could become supportive of your idea, sign on the idea, they'd be the ones be able to raise it within that system, to push it. The only other way is you got to go down to 110 Livingston Street in Brooklyn and raise it up in that way. No, I mean, if you're asking me how you can get it. Well, it's always difficult trying to get out. When you do it. Well, one of the things may do is to try to set up a demonstration school, to get support. Well, I guess have you kind of put it down in the demonstration thing,
So many people in connection with the idea of establishment throughout the country.
All right, well, let me tell you, maybe after we could talk about that, all right? Maybe I could talk with you after this. Okay. All right. Okay, all right, thanks, man.
Have any closing remarks?
Yeah. I think we've probably gotten at the point now where we can all admit, at least I certainly feel, and I hope you will, we've had a good afternoon. I feel... I feel that we have, I think, shared some important things that concern us and raised questions about those things in a way to help us begin to start thinking and talking about it among ourselves. And I would hope that next year this time that we'll still be right here and hopefully expanding what we're doing here this afternoon. Thanks very much.